All right, so we're diving into personality today, and it looks like you've brought along this comprehensive handbook of personality and psychopathology. Want to get to the bottom of how it all impacts your life, huh?
Yeah, it looks a bit intimidating. I get it.
Uh-huh.
That's where we step in, right? We'll sift through all the technical stuff and find those golden nuggets about how personality shapes our work, relationships, retirement, you name it.
You know, what I find fascinating is how personality it's not just about those obvious traits, those things you see on all those online quizzes.
Right.
It goes deeper, much deeper into how we each function and develop in our own unique ways.
So it's not just about labeling someone as like an introvert or an extrovert. There's more to it.
Absolutely, yeah. This handbook, it really stresses what it calls a tripartite focus, looking at personality from three different angles. Think of it like a triangle.
I like visual. Okay, good. So one side of this triangle is the idiographic, which that focuses on what makes you, you, like the individual. The other
Mhm.
side is the differential, looking at traits shared by, specific groups. And then the final side, you have the nomothetic, which explores universal characteristics, things we all share as humans.
So there's this universal human experience, but then each of us also has our own unique flavor,
That's
right?
exactly. You
Yeah,
got it.
I like that. Okay, but then how does personality even develop? Is it nature, nurture, some mix of both? What's the deal?
Well, the handbook digs into what they call the developmental systems perspective. It sees personality development as this intricate dance between, your genes and your environment. And here's where it gets really interesting. This development, they describe it as probabilistic.
Probabilistic sounds pretty technical. What does that even mean for, like for me trying to understand myself better?
Well, it means your personality, it isn't set in stone.
Mhm.
It's not like some fixed blueprint, right?
Yeah.
It's more like a roadmap with all these different routes you can take.
Okay.
So your genes, your early experiences, those lay the foundation. But your environment, the choices you make, those continue to shape, the path you take throughout life.
Oh, so there's hope for us yet. We're not just stuck with whatever personality we were like born with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the exciting part. This probabilistic nature, it means you have this potential for growth, for change throughout your whole life. But hold on, before we get too excited, we need to consider how we even try to measure and categorize personality in the first place. You've heard of the big five, right? Those personality traits.
Oh, of course. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism, those, right?
Yeah, those.
But I've always wondered, do those traits really apply to all cultures?
That's a fantastic question. And the handbook really dives into that debate about the universality of the big five. So while those traits, they offer a useful framework,
Hmm.
the source material, it suggests that certain cultures may value certain traits more than others. And those values can shape how personality develops and shows up in those cultures.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach to personality.
Not quite, no.
Okay.
For example, they talk about independent versus interdependent self-construals.
Hmm.
In individualistic cultures, like the U.S., independence is often really celebrated, right?
Yeah.
But in collectivist cultures, interdependence and putting the group first, those might be more valued. To get this great example, imagine a guy named Ferdinand. And he comes from a culture where flexibility in relationships, those are top priorities, right?
Hmm.
What they call an event time culture.
Okay.
And now he's living in a clock time culture, obsessed with schedules and, being on time.
Oh, I can see the clash. That's a really great way to show how cultural values can shape personality.
Exactly. And this brings up another challenge, an interesting one, when studying personality across cultures,
Hmm.
what they call conceptual equivalence.
Okay, yeah. What's that?
So are we even comparing apples to apples when we look at traits across different cultures? Does a specific personality trait have the same meaning in different cultural contexts?
That's such a good point. Makes you wonder if sometimes we're misinterpreting things because of cultural differences.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit here. Talk about the psychodynamic perspective. That's always seemed kind of mysterious to me.
It can be intriguing, yeah. This approach, it dives into internal conflicts and the unconscious mind. It draws on the work of, Freud and other theorists.
Oh, like those Freudian slips everyone jokes about?
Right, exactly.
But this book doesn't like dwell on Freud too much, right?
No, it doesn't. It focuses more on contemporary psychodynamic theories, especially what they call object relations theory.
Object relations theory. Okay, break that down for me. What's that all about?
So this theory, It emphasizes how those early relationships we have, especially with caregivers, how those shape our personality development. It suggests those early bonds, they form a kind of blueprint,
Yeah.
for our expectations and patterns in later relationships.
So if you had like a really secure and loving relationship with your parents, you're more likely to approach other relationships with like trust and confidence.
That's the idea, yeah.
Okay.
But if those early bonds were, full of inconsistency or neglect, that might lead to anxiety or maybe avoidance in relationships down the road. It's fascinating how these early blueprints can like influence our social and emotional lives in such huge ways.
Okay, so we've got nature, nurture, culture, the unconscious mind. That's a lot. But what about biology? Like, does our brain wiring play a role in shaping who we are?
Absolutely. This handbook really emphasizes a strong connection between personality and biology. Researchers are exploring, how specific areas of the brain and neural pathways, how those influence who we are. For example, even unconscious processes like those defense mechanisms we use to cope with stress, they've been linked to activity in specific parts of the brain.
Hold on, so you're saying our subconscious mind, it's actually like working at a neurological level?
It is, yeah.
Wow, that's wild. I'm starting to see how much it goes into like making us us.
It is remarkable, isn't it? And speaking of, how we develop over time, have you ever thought about how personality might actually change in stages throughout your life?
Yeah, sure. Like Erickson's stages of psychosocial development, is that what you mean?
Yeah, the source does mention Erickson, but it stresses that personality development is more like it's a continuous journey, not a series of, fixed steps.
Yeah.
They highlight attachment theory as a particularly important lens for understanding how those early bonds, they can have, these lasting impacts on our relationships, like throughout our whole lives.
So those early experiences with caregivers, they really do matter. But I'm also curious about, those theories that focus more on learning and behavior. How do those fit into the picture?
Great question. That's a perfect transition, actually. Handbook goes into behavioral theories, which those emphasize how learning and reinforcement shape our behaviors and ultimately our personalities.
So if someone is like always rewarded for being helpful, they're more likely to develop, an agreeable and helpful personality.
Exactly. You got it. Behavioral theories suggest that our experiences and the consequences of our actions, they play a major role in shaping who we are. But it's not all about, external rewards and punishments. There's also this fascinating perspective of evolutionary psychology.
Okay, evolutionary psychology, how does that relate to personality?
Well, evolutionary psychology, it looks at traits, personality traits, through this lens of survival and reproduction. So it suggests that certain traits, like conscientiousness or agreeableness, they might have evolved because they helped our ancestors survive and pass on their genes.
Oh, that's mind-blowing. So like my personality might be a result of thousands of years of evolution.
It's a fascinating thought, isn't it? And finally, you have the cognitive theories, which those focus on how our thoughts and beliefs actually shape our personalities and our emotional experiences.
So what I think actually influences who I am.
Yes, precisely. Cognitive theories, they emphasize the role of what they call schemas, which are, mental frameworks that we use to process information and interpret, like the world around us. So, for example, if you have like a negative schema about yourself, you might be more likely to see feedback as criticism, even if it's meant to be, helpful.
Oh, I know people like that. Always assume the worst.
Exactly. And these schemas, they can really impact our relationships, our self-esteem, our overall well-being. They also discuss what they call cognitive distortions. These are like these biased ways of thinking that can lead to, all sorts of negative emotions and behaviors.
Cognitive distortions, huh? Can you give me like an example of that?
Sure. One common one is called mind reading. That's where we assume we know what other people are thinking, often without any real evidence.
Oh, I totally do that all the time. Like my boss must think I'm incompetent because they didn't say good morning. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that kind of thinking, it creates, all this unnecessary stress and anxiety. So cognitive theories, they provide, these valuable insights into how our thinking actually shapes who we are. And they offer these great tools for challenging those negative thought patterns and developing, more balanced and realistic perspectives. So you can see there are all these different lenses,
Yeah.
right? Different ways of looking at and understanding personality.
It's a lot to digest, but I'm starting to see how these different theories fit together to like paint a more complete picture of who we are.
That's exactly it. Each perspective, it adds a valuable piece to the puzzle. It helps us unravel the complexities of personality, and it's really profound impact on our lives. And that brings us to, like, the exciting part, exploring how personality actually influences our experiences in specific areas, like, relationships, work, and even retirement.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Let's get into those real-world applications. After all, what good is all this knowledge if we don't know how to use it?
It's really fascinating to think about how all these theories we've been talking about, how they actually, like, play out in our everyday lives. This handbook gives some really interesting examples. Let's start with relationships. Have you ever noticed how some personality types, they just clash, while others, they seem to, like, complement each other perfectly?
Oh, absolutely. I have this friend who is like incredibly organized, detail-oriented, you know the type. And well, I'm much more spontaneous. I like to go with the flow. Let's just say our different approaches to planning have led to a few, well, interesting situations.
That's a perfect example. Yeah, and the handbook, it goes deeper, talking about these concepts of dependency and connectedness in relationships.
Okay, tell me more about that. What's the difference?
So healthy relationships, they thrive on connectedness, this sense of mutual support, respect, understanding. But sometimes you see one partner might become a bit too dependent on the other. Then it creates an imbalance,
Yeah.
right? And that can lead to resentment or even codependency.
So it's about finding that balance between independence and interdependence.
Exactly. And this handbook really emphasizes how our core beliefs, those beliefs about ourselves and others, they play a huge role in shaping those relationship patterns.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you believe you're like not worthy of love, you might, unconsciously sabotage your relationships or maybe settle for less than you deserve.
Precisely. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Our beliefs, they influence our behaviors, which in turn can actually reinforce those beliefs. It's a tough cycle to break.
Sounds like self-awareness is key here. If we can like recognize those limiting beliefs, maybe we can start to challenge them and create, healthier patterns in our relationships.
Absolutely. And this handbook also, it dives into how different personality traits might, actually show up in relationships. For example, someone with a highly anxious personality, they might be more prone to jealousy, insecurity.
Oh, yeah.
They might constantly need reassurance from their partner, which can put a real strain on the relationship.
Oh, I know someone like that, always checking their partner's phone, getting upset over like the smallest things.
Yeah, classic example.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, someone with a more avoidant personality, they might have trouble with intimacy, emotional closeness,
Right.
and so they might push their partner away or avoid commitment altogether.
I've seen that too. It's like this constant push and pull.
Exactly. And those are just, a couple of examples of how personality can create both challenges and opportunities,
Yeah.
right, in our relationship.
Yeah. Okay, so understanding our own personality and the personalities of our partners, that can help us like navigate these complexities a little better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing our strengths and weaknesses,
Right.
our needs, our expectations, and then finding ways to communicate and connect in a healthy and fulfilling way.
This is giving me a lot to think about in my own relationships. But let's move on to work, shall we? I'm really curious about how personality affects our careers and job satisfaction.
It's another area where personality plays a huge role. The handbook looks at the relationship between personality traits and things like career choices, work styles, and that overall job satisfaction you were talking about. For instance, you might think you're stuck with your big 5 traits, right? But research suggests that conscientiousness, for example, it actually increases as we age.
Wait, really? So our personalities can like still shift even as we get older?
They can, yeah.
Yeah.
But going back to your question about work, this handbook, it suggests that certain personality types, they really are better suited for certain jobs.
So you're saying some people are just like naturally predisposed to certain career?
There's definitely some evidence to back that up. Like, for example, someone who's highly conscientious, detail-oriented, they might thrive in a structured, organized work environment. They might excel in those roles that require precision, accuracy, a strong sense of responsibility.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, someone like that, they probably make a great accountant or an engineer.
Exactly. And on the flip side, someone who's more extroverted, enjoys social interaction, they might be drawn to careers that involve working with people, right? Like sales, marketing, teaching, things like that.
Okay, so extroverts need their people fix, and introverts, they maybe prefer to work more independently. But isn't there a danger in oversimplifying things, by just looking at introversion and extroversion?
You raise a valid point, yeah.
Mm.
It's crucial to consider the whole picture. Other traits like openness to experience, agreeableness, emotional stability, those all come into play too. For instance, someone who's, high in openness, they might thrive in a job that offers constant learning, new challenges, right? While someone more agreeable, they might excel in a collaborative, supportive team environment.
So how can we use this knowledge to make, smarter career choices?
Well, it all starts with self-awareness. Understanding your own personality traits, those strengths, weaknesses, preferences, values that can help you identify careers that really align with who you are and what you find fulfilling.
So I need to do some soul searching before I jump into a new career, huh?
It's a good idea. The Handbook even mentioned this. It's called the Holland Theory of Vocational Personalities. And it suggests that people are drawn to careers that match their personality types. It identifies 6 basic types: realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, and conventional. Each type has its own, set of interests, values, and skills that align with certain fields.
So like a realistic type might be drawn to more hands-on practical careers, while like an artistic type, they might prefer something more creative, expressive.
Exactly. And this theory, it suggests the more your personality type and your work environment match up, the more likely you are to experience, job satisfaction and success.
That makes a lot of sense. It's all about finding that sweet spot where our personality and our work they just click. But what about those who kind of break the mold? The handbook mentioned entrepreneurs, right?
Yeah, they did. Entrepreneurs, they have this really unique combination of traits. They tend to be high in independence, risk-taking, and resilience,
Yeah.
which are essential for navigating all the challenges of starting and running a business. They also often show high levels of conscientiousness, creativity, and a really strong internal drive.
So maybe not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur.
Well, it definitely takes a certain personality to really thrive in that kind of environment. Someone who needs a lot of structure, a lot of security, they might find all the uncertainty and constant change of entrepreneurship just too overwhelming.
Right. Okay, so personality affects our relationships, our careers. What about retirement? I'm curious how it influences, how we experience that big life transition.
That's a fascinating part the handbook explores as well. It highlights how personality, plays a significant role in how well we adapt to retirement. Some people, they embrace this new chapter with enthusiasm, while others, they really struggle with the loss of structure, purpose, and social connections that work provided.
So some people might like totally thrive in retirement while others they kind of they flounder.
Exactly. And they offer these two really contrasting examples to illustrate this. So they describe a man who was forced into retirement by his company, and he took it really hard, like a personal rejection. He had this
Right.
history of insecurity and the separation from his job. It triggered all those deep-seated insecurities. He spiraled into depression, really struggling to find meaning and purpose in his life.
That's really sad. It sounds like his whole identity was wrapped up in his work.
Exactly. And his personality, particularly his vulnerability to feeling, rejected, it made him more susceptible to having a really hard time adjusting to retirement. On the other hand, they described this other man who chose to retire, after he received a large inheritance. And he never really enjoyed his work anyway, so he saw retirement as this golden opportunity to pursue his passions, reading, travel, spending time with loved ones. He had no problem letting go of his career, and he just thrived in this new phase of life.
Well, those are such different experiences. So it seems like his personality, his ability to detach from work easily, it made his transition to retirement a lot smoother.
Exactly. His values and priorities, they were already aligned with a fulfilling life outside of work. It really shows how personality can influence how we see and experience these major life transitions.
Okay, so personality impacts, how we approach retirement. But what about something a little more fun? How we spend our free time, our leisure time. Does personality shape that too?
It absolutely does. The handbook suggests that personality influences, which leisure activities we prefer, our level of involvement in those activities, even how much time we set aside for recreation.
So some people might like be drawn to those high energy adventures, while others they prefer more quiet, introspective activities.
Yeah.
I can see how that fits with some of the personality types we've been discussing.
Exactly. So someone with a high need for stimulation, for excitement, like someone who scores high in sensation seeking, they might be drawn to things like extreme sports or traveling to new and exotic places.
Okay, so thrill seekers, they're wired a bit differently, huh?
You can say that, yeah. They thrive on novelty, on pushing their limits. And then on the flip side, you have someone who's more introverted, enjoys peace and quiet. They might prefer, spending their leisure time reading, gardening, or meditating.
It sounds like there's a leisure activity out there for every personality type.
Exactly. The key is finding activities that align with your interests, your values,
Right.
and your energy levels.
Yeah.
Right. But the handbook does point out an interesting challenge for certain personality types. They talk about how people with a really achievement-oriented personality, those who are driven to succeed, always striving for more, they might actually struggle to relax and enjoy leisure time.
So like workaholics, they might find it hard to switch off and just have fun.
Exactly. They might feel like guilty or restless if they're not, if they're not being
Yeah.
productive, even in their free time.
It makes me think about, the pressure some people feel to always be doing something, even when they're supposed to be relaxing. Like they have to optimize every moment of their day.
That's a great point. And it really highlights how important it is to find that balance between work and play, right?
Right.
Between striving for achievement and allowing ourselves to be present and enjoy the moment. And that balance, it depends on our personality and our lifestyle.
It's been really incredible exploring all these different aspects of personality and how they, connect to our experiences. I'm starting to see how it's like woven into every part of our lives, from our closest relationships to the careers we choose, even to the way we spend our free time.
It truly is. It's a remarkable force in our lives. And as we've been discussing, it's not fixed, it's not static, it's dynamic. It's this system that's constantly evolving, shaped by our biology, our experiences, and our choices.
It's empowering and a little bit daunting too, knowing that we have the power to shape who we are.
It's a journey of self-discovery, and the more we understand about personality, the better equipped we are to navigate all its complexities,
Yeah.
right? And create lives that are meaningful, fulfilling, and authentic.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. But before we wrap up this discussion, I want to go back to something that really caught my attention earlier, the concept of subclinical psychopathy. You said that some seemingly successful people they might actually exhibit these traits. That's a pretty provocative idea.
It is, yeah. It challenges our assumptions about success, and what it takes to get ahead in life.
Okay, but how do we tell the difference between someone who's just, ambitious, driven, and someone who's crossing that line into subclinical psychopathy? What are the warning signs?
That's a crucial question, and it's not about labeling people. It's more about understanding the nuances of these traits, right? And recognizing when they might be being used in manipulative or harmful ways. One key difference is empathy. People with subclinical psychopathy, they often struggle with genuine empathy.
So they might be like charming and charismatic on the surface, but they lack that deeper understanding of other people's feelings.
Exactly. They might be really skilled at mimicking social cues and emotional responses, but it's all an act.
It's a little unsettling. It makes you wonder who you can really trust.
It's important to trust your gut,
Yeah.
If someone's actions, if they constantly contradict their words, or if you get this sense of unease, discomfort around them, pay attention to those red flags. Another red flag is lack of remorse.
Or guilt.
So they might do things that hurt other people, but they don't seem to feel bad about it. Right. They might rationalize their behavior, minimize the consequences, or blame others for their own mistakes. They often have this really inflated sense of self-importance. And they believe they deserve special treatment.
It's like they have this unshakable belief that they're better than everyone else, but how do they get away with it?
Well, the handbook describes how these individuals They often use what they call justification mechanisms to rationalize their behavior,
Yeah.
both to themselves and to others.
Justification mechanisms. What is that? What does that even mean? Can you give me like an example?
Sure. They might twist the facts
Yeah.
to fit their narrative, right? They might downplay the harm they've caused or claim that they were acting in the best interests of others. They're often very skilled at manipulating situations to get what they want.
So they're basically masters of deception.
They can be very, very persuasive, yeah.
Yeah.
Adept at getting what they want, even if it means, bending the rules or taking advantage of other people.
This is starting to sound a bit Machiavellian.
That's a sharp observation.
Yeah.
Machiavellianism, which is characterized by cunning manipulation, a real focus on power. It is often associated with subclinical psychopathy.
Wow, this is giving me a whole new perspective on some of the people I've met in my life.
It's important to remember though that these traits, they exist on a spectrum. Not everyone who shows some of these tendencies is a subclinical psychopath. It's about being aware of the potential for these darker aspects of personality, right? And learning to recognize the red flags.
Okay, so it's about being more careful, more discerning.
Yeah.
Setting healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
Not becoming paranoid or suspicious of everyone, right?
Exactly. It's about protecting yourself while still being open to, connecting with others.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Nature, nurture, culture, biology, the unconscious mind, developmental stages, personality change, and even the darker side of personality. My brain is officially full.
I can imagine. It's been quite a journey. But before we wrap things up, I want to touch on a concept that's really central to personality.
Mm-hmm.
And it has huge implications for how we approach life.
Yeah.
Self-awareness.
Self-awareness, huh? Sounds important. But what exactly does that mean in the context of, personality?
Self-awareness, it's the ability to kind of step back and objectively observe our own, thoughts, feelings, behaviors.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing our strengths and weaknesses, our motivations, our patterns of behavior. It's the foundation of personal growth.
So it's like having this inner mirror, right? That reflects who we truly are, warts and all.
It's a great analogy. And this inner mirror, it allows us to see ourselves more clearly, right? To understand why we do the things we do and to make conscious choices about how we want to show up in the world.
Okay, so self-awareness is essential for personal growth development. Got it. But how do we cultivate that? Is it something we're born with, or can we develop it over time?
Self-awareness, it's a skill, and it can be cultivated, strengthened, throughout our lives. It's like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And luckily there are lots of tools and techniques available to help us, develop this really crucial skill.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of exercises do we need to do to work that self-awareness muscle?
Well, things like mindfulness practices, journaling, getting feedback from others, therapy, all those can be incredibly helpful.
Mindfulness journaling, those sound a bit touchy-feely.
They might seem that way, yeah. But they can be really powerful tools for cultivating self-awareness. Let's start with mindfulness. Have you ever tried any mindfulness practices?
I've played around with some meditation apps, but I'm not sure I'm doing it right.
So mindfulness, it's all about paying attention to the present moment.
Yeah.
Without judgment. It's about noticing our thoughts, our feelings, our sensations as they come up without getting swept away by them.
So it's like hitting the pause button on our busy minds and just observing what's happening inside and around us.
Exactly. And by practicing mindfulness regularly, even if it's just for a few minutes each day, we become more aware of our internal landscape, our habitual thought patterns, our emotional reactions.
Okay, I can see how that could be helpful for becoming more self-aware. What about journaling? How does that fit in?
Well, journaling, it gives us this space for reflection, for self-discovery. By writing down our thoughts, our feelings, we create a little distance from them, right? And that allows us to examine them a bit more objectively. We might start to notice, patterns in our thinking, recurring themes in our emotional experiences, maybe triggers that set off certain reactions.
So it's like having a conversation with ourselves on paper, getting to know ourselves better through the written word.
Exactly. And sometimes just putting our thoughts and feelings into words, it can help us make sense of them. gain a new perspective.
Yeah, I can see how that could be helpful, especially for dealing with, you know, difficult emotions or confusing situations. But what about feedback from other people? Isn't that a little risky? What if people say things that hurt our feelings?
It's true that receiving feedback, especially, negative feedback can be tough, but it can also be incredibly valuable for our self-awareness. When we're open to hearing how other people see us, it can illuminate those blind spots in our self-perception.
Blind spots. Can you give me an example?
Sure, maybe we come across as, arrogant without even realizing it, or maybe we interrupt people constantly, but we're just not aware of it. Feedback from others, it can help us see those patterns of behavior that we might be, completely blind to.
Okay, so feedback can be like a reality check, helps us see ourselves more clearly. But how do we make sure we're getting, constructive feedback and not just criticism disguised as feedback?
That's an important distinction, yeah. It's best to seek feedback from people we trust, people who have our best interests at heart, and who are good at communicating their observations in a kind and respectful way.
That makes sense. It's about seeking feedback from people who genuinely want to help us grow, help us improve. And finally, you mentioned therapy as a tool for self-awareness. How does therapy help us become more self-aware?
Well, therapy, it provides this structured, supportive environment to explore our thoughts, feelings, behaviors with a trained professional. Therapists, they're skilled at asking those insightful questions, challenging our assumptions, helping us identify patterns and blind spots in our thinking and behavior.
So it's like having a personal coach for self-awareness.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. Therapists can help us develop the skills and the insights we need to become more self-aware and to make positive changes in our lives.
Okay, so we've got mindfulness, journaling, feedback, and therapy. A whole toolkit for boosting our self-awareness.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
and remember, self-awareness, it's an ongoing process,
Yeah.
right? Not a destination. The more we practice, the more we empower ourselves to shape our personalities and create lives that are aligned with our values, with our aspirations.
That's really inspiring. I'm starting to see how self-awareness is the foundation for personal growth, for fulfilling relationships. So before we get too philosophical here, let's bring it back to the handbook. You mentioned earlier that it provides some interesting insights into how personality shapes our experiences in those specific areas of life, like, relationships, work, retirement, recreation. I'm curious to explore those in a little more detail.
Yeah, let's do it. Those are some of the most, practical and relatable aspects of this whole conversation.
Okay, let's start with relationships. I think we all kind of know that personality plays a big role in who we're drawn to, right?
Yeah.
And how we interact with our loved ones. But I'm curious to hear what the handbook has to say about it.
Well, the handbook, it emphasizes that our core beliefs about ourselves and others, they really shape our relationship patterns.
Okay, can you give me an example of how that works?
Imagine someone who grew up with parents who are very critical, very demanding.
Right.
They might develop this core belief that they're not good enough, right?
Yeah.
And this belief, it might unconsciously influence their relationships.
So they might constantly seek like validation from their partners or sabotage their relationships out of fear of being rejected.
Exactly. Their core beliefs are driving their behaviors, creating
Yeah.
this self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's the key to breaking free from these negative relationship patterns?
Well, it often starts with becoming aware of those core beliefs,
Yeah.
and understanding how they're influencing our interactions.
So we're back to self-awareness again. It seems like that's the key to unlocking so much potential in our lives.
Absolutely. Once we're aware of these beliefs, we can start to challenge them. To question whether they're really true, and to develop new, more empowering narratives about ourselves and our relationships.
Okay, so awareness is the first step. But how do we actually change those deep-seated beliefs that are holding us back?
Well, that's where therapy can be incredibly helpful. A therapist can guide us through the process of exploring those beliefs, understanding where they came from, and developing new, healthier ways of of relating to ourselves and to others.
So therapy can help us rewrite our relationship scripts. It's like getting a relationship makeover from the inside out.
You could say that, yeah. It's about identifying the patterns that aren't serving us anymore, and
Yeah.
and creating new, more fulfilling ways of connecting with others.
That's encouraging. It means we're not, doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over and over again. But I'm also curious about how specific personality styles might play out in relationships. What kind of insights does the handbook offer on that?
They provide some fascinating examples. For instance, they talk about how someone with a highly anxious personality, they might be prone to jealousy, to insecurity in relationships. They might constantly need reassurance from their partner, which can lead to, conflict, tension.
Oh yeah, I know someone like that. They're always checking their partner's phone, getting upset over, the smallest things.
Right. And on the other hand, someone with a more avoidant personality, they might struggle with intimacy, with emotional closeness. They might push their partner away or avoid commitment altogether.
I've definitely seen that dynamic too. It's like one partner's always chasing after the other one who's constantly running away.
Exactly. And these are just, a couple of examples of how personality can shape the dynamics of our relationships.
Okay, so understanding our own personality and the personalities of our partners, it can help us like navigate these complexities and build stronger, healthier relationships.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing our strengths and weaknesses, our needs and expectations, and finding ways to communicate and connect in a way that works for both partners.
That's great advice. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about work. How does personality influence our careers and our job satisfaction?
So the handbook, it really dives into this. It explores those connections between personality traits and things like career choices, work styles, and overall job satisfaction.
So are you saying that certain personality types are better suited for certain jobs?
There's definitely evidence that points to that. Yeah.
Hmm.
For example, someone who's highly conscientious, detail oriented, they might thrive in a structured, organized work environment, right? They might excel in roles that require precision, accuracy, a strong sense of responsibility.
Okay, that makes sense. So like accountants and engineers, they might be high in conscientiousness.
Exactly. And on the other hand, someone who's more extroverted, who enjoys social interaction, they might be drawn to careers that involve working with people, like sales, marketing, or teaching.
Okay, so extroverts they need to be around people, while introverts they maybe prefer to work more independently. But isn't it a bit simplistic to just focus on introversion and extroversion? What
Right.
about all the
Yeah, it is. It really is. But it's also about all those other traits. Those
yeah.
deeper layers that really shape who we are and how we interact with the world around us.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And this handbook it really emphasizes that dynamic nature of personality. It's not something we're just stuck with. We have the power to grow, to evolve throughout our whole lives.
That's right. And that's where self-awareness comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's like shining a light on those deeper layers, understanding our strengths, our weaknesses, our needs, and even those triggers that can sometimes, lead us astray. And with that awareness, we can make more conscious choices that really align with our values and our aspirations.
Absolutely. Self-awareness it's like the cornerstone of personal growth. It's like having a roadmap, right? That helps us navigate all those inevitable twists and turns in the journey of life,
Right.
guiding us towards decisions that resonate with our authentic selves.
That's a great analogy, but I have to admit, all this talk about subclinical psychopathy, it's left me feeling a little wary. I'm starting to see those traits everywhere I look.
Yeah, I get that. It's a new concept for a lot of people, and it can be unsettling to realize that some individuals might be might be using these kind of darker tactics to get ahead, you know. But it's important to remember that not everyone who exhibits some of these traits is a subclinical psychopath. It's about recognizing those red flags that we talked about earlier. That consistent disconnect between words and actions, the lack of empathy and remorse, and that inflated sense of self-importance.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, it's not about becoming like paranoid or suspicious of everyone. It's more about being more discerning, trusting our gut instincts.
Exactly. If something feels off in an interaction, you know, if someone's behavior consistently raises those red flags, it's wise to pay attention to those signals and to set healthy boundaries. You don't have to, you know, tolerate behavior that makes you feel uncomfortable or disrespected.
Yeah, that's a powerful reminder. Protecting ourselves doesn't mean shutting ourselves off from the world, right? It's about being aware and making conscious choices about who we let into our lives. Precisely, it's about navigating relationships with both discernment and an open heart.
Okay. So we've talked about self-awareness and the importance of recognizing those red flags of subclinical psychopathy. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to a concept that's really closely related to personality, the idea of meaning and purpose. After all, what good is understanding our personality if we don't know how to use it to create a life that feels, you know, fulfilling?
That's a great point. You know, our personalities are expressions of our unique values, our beliefs, our aspirations, and finding meaning, finding purpose. It's like discovering that North Star, you know,
Yeah.
that guides us towards a life that feels truly aligned with who we are.
Okay, so how do we go about finding that North Star? Is our meaning and purpose something that we discover out in the world, or do we create it ourselves through our choices and actions?
That's a question philosophers have been, you know, wrestling with for ages. I think it's a beautiful interplay of both discovery and creation.
Uh-huh.
We discover our purpose by exploring our passions, you know, our interests, our values, those things that light us up from the inside out, and we create it by actively pursuing those passions, making choices that align with our values, and contributing to something larger than ourselves.
It's like we're both explorers and artists, you know, uncovering our own unique purpose and then using our personalities as the brushstrokes to paint that purpose onto the canvas of our lives.
That's a beautiful metaphor, and it's an ongoing process, right? It's this dynamic dance between discovery, creation, and expression.
That's really inspiring. It means we're not just, you know, passive passengers in life. We're active co-creators of our own experiences. We can use our understanding of personality to craft a life that feels meaningful, aligned with our deepest selves.
Absolutely, our personalities hold these valuable clues about the paths that are most likely to lead to fulfillment.
Yeah.
And by paying attention to those clues, we can make choices that honor who we are and what we truly value.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've explored so much from the basic theories of personality to its profound impact on our relationships, our work, and even our leisure.
Yeah.
And we've learned that self-awareness, a discerning eye, and a willingness to pursue our own unique purpose. Those are essential for harnessing the power of personality.
It's been an absolute pleasure exploring this fascinating world with you. And remember, personality, it's a journey, not a destination. Embrace the adventure of self-discovery and use those insights to create a life that feels truly authentic and fulfilling.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of personality. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and are inspired to continue your own journey of self-discovery. Until next time, keep diving deep.